Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. Moving beyond questions of God's existence, this podcast asks what atheists should be doing next in a godless world.
And we're back. We're back from break, feeling refreshed, revitalized, and I don't know about you, Nathan, but just exhausted. How are you doing after this short but wonderful summer break?
I'm doing well, relaxed and refreshed, I suppose.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've been suffering a hot and wet summer, but taking a break was pretty nice. But now we're back into it.
Mm-hmm.
And today, what we want to get into is something we've long wanted to talk about, but have danced around it pretty significantly. It always comes up, it seems to get touched upon, but we've never really delved into the politics of atheism. And not just, how should we vote as atheists? How do we organize? But more this, how does atheism shape political views? And not on a personal level, this idea that we have a worldview. The worldview is that there is a world without God. We live in a material world that's been shaped by the forces of nature. And how does this convert into political views? And
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, you found a phrase that you want to talk about that you think helps explain what the atheist political view is. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about is this phrase, no gods, no masters, which comes about in the late 19th century in France, and it becomes
Hmm.
this sort of anarchist slogan. And I think it's sort of like maybe it can help explain atheist politics a little bit. I mean, I think there's some limits to that, but
Yeah,
I
I
guess
think
the
it does.
oh,
You're saying that
yeah.
we're all anarchists, right? That was easy.
I think it's just about the idea that when you reject the idea of God, that there's also maybe implications about other forms of authority as well. So like you're throwing off other kinds of masters as well. I
Hmm.
think that sort of maybe helps to explain atheist politics historically and then maybe today as well.
Is there more? Can you bring in examples that you're thinking of when you think of like this idea of masters? We know that the idea of no gods, right? But
Hmm.
this idea of no masters, that's a huge jump. And in anarchism, it means like there's no legitimate political authority, which I don't think is the same extent that you're claiming.
No, no, that's true. I think, well, one example could be monarchy. And
Mm,
we've talked about this a little bit in some of the previous podcasts. One common justification for monarchy is that kings are divinely chosen, I suppose, to rule. That
yeah.
it's that there's something like in the bloodline that
Mm,
is divinely chosen, and that's what gives them the authority. So
yeah.
naturally, if one is an atheist, they're going to oppose that justification. Yeah.
Yeah, so justification, though, it's not the right word. And this is
Okay.
a little more formal and technical. Justifications sort of rationalize something, right? So you're
Hmm.
dealing with something that's de facto, and if you justify it, you say, you know what, I'm okay with that. Kind of like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas what we really want to get to is this concept of political legitimacy, which
Right.
is weird because it's not a justification. The concept of legitimacy is about when someone has the right to rule
Yeah.
and when we have a duty to obey. In that case, it's the divine right of kings. It makes that person the king. If they were
Yeah.
not chosen by God, if they're not the firstborn, they're not legitimate. And we see like constant wars in European history over
Hmm.
who is the legitimate heir and how are
Yeah.
they going to carry this on. And it's about legitimacy. Which of these two people, which is the king and which is the pretend.
Hmm.
Who is the one I have to give fealty to? Who is the one I need to obey? And it's not because one has a bigger army than the other,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah,
One has a special quality, namely, like, well, they're the firstborn son, therefore they're the legitimate ruler.
that's true. I mean, I do think maybe it was always the case that there is talk about legitimacy of a particular king, but there's also kind of political motives for supporting that king as well, beyond just like, that God has chosen them or something.
Well, yeah, and to split it up, I mean, there are very often ideas of legitimacy are kind of tough to wrap our head around. The most basic one I can think of, especially in the US context, is that as a democracy, we're raised with this idea that the person with the most votes wins. So they're both going to claim, two people can claim to have won. We've seen this recently, can claim
Hmm.
to have won,
Yes.
but it's this idea the one with the most votes is the one who's legitimate, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And in the US, we have a legal system that does it in a different way. So we have this system written in the Constitution that says this is the way that we choose the president. So this is how we get a legitimate president. And
Hmm.
it's this
Hmm.
complicated, convoluted system called the Electoral College. But at the end of the day, even when one person loses the popular vote, if they win the Electoral College, they become legally recognized. They become the legitimate president. People respect it, even though you get people who say things like, not my president, or they have bumper
Hmm.
stickers to that effect. There's no doubt that that person is the legitimate
Hmm.
president, right? And
Hmm.
this was in 2000. It came down to a court case, but the court legitimized it, said legally we recognize this follows the process, this follows the legality, this follows the system by which we make a president the president, and
Hmm.
therefore George Bush is the president. It's a weird thing to wrap your head around, but it is very much this. It pushes it forward. Legitimacy confers this power upon a person. It's not a justification.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess. Well, one of the things, sort of historically, that's interesting is that there's definitely this connection between atheism and any sort of free thinking, we'll say, and being a Republican. So Republican, like in a small R thing, whereas
Yeah, or
you
the British sense, or the like electoral
in
sense.
the sense of like rejecting a monarchy, I
Okay,
guess.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I suppose it's interesting because obviously, like, there's this issue of legitimacy. Maybe it's too much of a tangent, but like, I think it's one thing to say like I recognize, if you're in Britain or something, like I recognize that the monarch is the legitimate head of state, but I also don't believe in the monarchy, or I don't think it's like it's a the correct or like the preferred form of government.
Yeah, and that's when it starts to break down, because
Hmm.
what you're saying, what the Republicans, in that sense, or like let's just say anti-monarchical forces say, is that like being born to someone else does not give you the right to
Yeah.
rule. And we can get into a lot of cases where legitimate authority loses legitimacy over time, but that the argument between a monarch and an anti-monarch, or monarchist and anti-monarchist, is the argument that the king is legitimate. We ought to have this lineage passed down. We ought to pass power down that way, versus someone who says that is not legitimate. We need to choose for ourselves. And this is a great place to start, because that the divine right of kings comes specifically from a theistic perspective.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
entirely this theistic perspective. As you need a God, God confers this power. If you remove God, that legitimacy falls away completely.
Hmm.
All right, so this is great. So as atheists, we're small r Republicans, or at least anti-kings. Fantastic. I Nathan, do you I'm an American, so I think it's
Yes.
easier for me to hate royalty.
Yeah.
But as a Canadian, where do you stand on the royals?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting in Canada just because the Queen Elizabeth is technically our head of state, or rather, I suppose, like the governor general, which is her representative in Canada. But anyway, like the Queen is on our money or on our $20 bill,
Mm.
for example. And personally, I would like to see Canada become like a republic, so to get rid of the monarchy. But I don't think it's a hugely pressing issue.
Does it come from, has your atheism informed that perspective that
Mm,
we shouldn't have a monarch on our money because there is no God?
that's a good question. Maybe a little bit. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I
Well,
mean,
okay,
yeah.
let's make this a little more personal,
Okay.
because we can think of it like this is the big, these are big political questions, but I think it's something that we do in daily life anyway. We recognize legitimacy for who we ought to obey. If someone says to do something, we ought to do it. It's good to do it. They have the right to tell us to do that, and we ought to do it. So let me give you some examples. I want to give you four choices, Nathan.
Okay.
All right. So here are the four choices. You can choose one of these answers. It's three people. Is it the doctor, the priest, a garbage man, or none of the above? These are the four answers you can give
For what? So what is the question?
for
Sorry.
who you ought to obey. I will give you some
Oh.
situations, and you tell me
Okay.
who you ought to obey.
Okay. So it's just to clarify. It's priest, doctor, garbage man, and someone and
And none of the
none of the
above.
above. Okay.
None of the above. All right.
Yes. Ready.
So here's the problem you face in life. Who will you obey? You will go to them and say, I seek your guidance. Whatever you say, I will
Mm,
do.
okay.
You need to know how to sort your recycling. Who do you go to?
I would go to the garbage man in that
Garbage
case.
man,
Or
right?
yes.
He's
Yeah.
the authority. Okay,
Yeah.
why? What makes him the legitimate
Um.
authority here?
Hmm. I suppose because he has the knowledge about the question. Like he's sort of knows about the regulations and so on.
He knows about the regulations. He knows, right? He knows the proper way. He knows how it needs to be when it gets to wherever it goes, which we as good consumers just imagine as sort of like a hole in space time. Yeah, right. Like,
Yes.
so it's knowledge power. It's the appropriate thing. It's the right way to do it. The rules and regulations. All of this stuff. Okay, easy, right?
Yes.
He's
Easy.
the legitimate authority.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question. You're feeling a little off.
Mm-hmm.
You have worries about your overall health and wellness. Maybe questions about your diet. To whom
Yes.
do you turn? Doctor, priest, garbage man, none of the above.
I would go for the doctor in that case.
Why would you go to the doctor?
The doctor would have the knowledge to guide to help guide my choices and to be able to know like what to do in a certain situation.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Same for people, or four choices: doctor, priest, garbage man, none of the above. You think you might be drinking a lot,
Right.
imbibing too
Okay.
much alcohol. To whom would you
Yes.
turn and obey them?
Mm,
Doctor, priest, garbage man, none of the above.
I would go again for the doctor, I think.
Really? Why?
Again, because the doctor has, again, the knowledge about what would be the best course in that situation, I think.
I agree that he would know, but I don't think people would be honest talking to the doctor, and I think I'd ignore him. For me, it's the
Yeah.
garbage man. If
Okay.
you talk to your garbage man
Uh-huh.
and he says something like, "Wow, you drink a lot,"
Hmm.
the garbage man knows, because he knows how
Ah.
much a normal person drinks.
Yes.
Right. So I think there they would have like the true knowledge power. And
Mm,
doctors, like, always going to tell you don't drink. Right.
that's true. But
But what we recognize is like this knowledge power. This is where we're going to go for the best advice. Okay. Same thing. Doctor, priest, garbage man, none of the above. You want to know the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. Who do you
mm,
talk to? You need moral guidance. Who do you talk to?
I think I would. I mean, I might talk to any of them, like, but not in their capacity as priest or doctor or garbage man. I mean, like, I wouldn't. I guess I wouldn't obey any of their authority. I would say so. I would say none of the above in that
None
case.
of the above,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
do not have, but in there,
Hmm.
is the priest. Isn't that their job? Or we can
Well,
say
that
make it any member of the clergy. Why do you reject the authority of a man of the cloth
yes,
to define for you morality in the world?
because I think their system of morality comes from the Bible and so on, and I don't accept that as true.
Is there a thing that you would is there a time when it's appropriate to obey a priest or a member of the clergy or whatever? I don't know what a generic religious
Um,
title is.
yeah,
Holy man, holy
holy,
person,
yeah, yeah, holy person maybe.
a holy person who is
Yeah,
holy person.
no, I don't.
Is
I
there
don't.
a
Oh,
time that you think that confers an appropriate authority that needs to be obeyed? That they could say something to you or tell you to do something, and you would feel this obligation to do it because they are a legitimate authority.
no, I don't think so.
And I think this is on this micro level,
Hmm.
this is atheists' views of legitimacy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That ultimately we reject sort of any church authority just
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
out of hand. If they were telling you something like, I don't know, the that marijuana ought to be illegal, like, would you accept a priest's opinion on that?
No,
If they
I,
told you they think it should be legal, would you accept a priest's opinion on that?
not in their capacity as a priest.
Right? You might just agree with
I
them,
might.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so it doesn't mean we can't. So when we reject this sort of
Hmm.
priestly, I'm sorry, I don't have a better word for
No,
it,
holy
this sort of
person. Yeah.
clerical or religious authority, it doesn't mean we can't agree with them or even work with them for that same purpose. It's just that we don't recognize them gaining any authority over anyone, legitimate authority. We don't have to obey them just because they are of this class, of this group,
Yeah.
right? Whereas with the doctor, we know, okay, if I want to get healthy, I really ought to do what they say. If I want my garbage picked up, I need to do this stuff to get it taken away, to get it treated correctly, whatever it is. In classrooms, it's about, if you want to get that grade, you have to respect the teacher's authority. That's just how these things work, right? It's that position confers certain authority. But as atheists, we just completely reject this.
I mean, I think one thing is that it's definitely true that atheists do reject the authority of priests and holy people. I mean, but I think the thing is like historically, there's it's so much more than that because government has been so intertwined with religion in so many countries that yeah, being an atheist has also had like more direct political implications beyond just rejecting the authority of priests because that's already maybe clear from being an atheist.
Mm-mm. So, what are some other things you would add to this? You would build on top of it.
I mean, like what we were talking about earlier about like rejecting monarchy and things. I mean, or take like like education for example, which in so many countries was maybe managed directly by or indirectly by the by religious organizations. So to I guess to be an atheist, like you also had political opinions about the education system, for example, like who should be running that, things like that. I think, yeah,
Yeah. So, like, what religions ought to have the right to do in
yeah, that's
in a
true.
society?
Yes,
And
yes.
this is, I think, becoming a pretty hot topic in Canada right now, isn't it? With the recent revelations.
That's true. Yeah, there's been recently at these residential schools, which were schools that were intended for Indigenous people and were often run by the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church, and with the goal of sort of completely removing their Indigenous heritage, and so Indigenous people would be taken from their families and put in these boarding schools and kind of punished for if they spoke their native language or something like this. And then like bit recently, there's been revelations where there have been mass graves found at various residential schools. So this is definitely calling into question these religious organizations' roles in the residential schools.
Yeah, they shouldn't be in charge of the schools. Was
No, no.
was that their like overt purpose? Was that sort of like cultural obliteration, just a
Yeah,
complete like assimilation? Take First Nation kids and make them Canadians?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
Wow.
mean, I think they had, they had a like for in their minds, it was a benevolent purpose of sort of quote unquote civilizing them, and the way to do that is to take them completely away from their own culture and just destroy it. Yeah, so that they can live in, again, quote unquote civilized society.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously, there was horrendous abuses and things.
Wow.
Um,
Is
yeah.
does the church still have a role in education? Is it state supported in Canada?
It's mostly government run, but I mean, there's a Catholic school board in my province of Ontario, and I'm not sure like exactly what the role of the church is in that, but anyway, like there is still like religion's a little bit intertwined still.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
I mean, this is what I would expect is that they kind of they're seen to lose legitimacy. And even at these other levels, right? Like religious interference with secular processes or secular programs, right? That shouldn't be legitimate. That's not an appropriate use of their power. They don't have the right to make these demands upon people or claims.
yeah, I mean, it should be said like that in the case of the residential schools, they worked like the churches worked hand in hand with the government to do this.
That's awful. Do they know the extent of the deaths?
No,
Is it
I think
is it ultimately just like unknowable?
they're doing more sort of archaeological work, I think, in around this like former residential schools. And I think there's been a couple of cases of like finding new mass graves, but it's not clear exactly when these were from or what the like why there was so many children dying at these schools, like if it's disease or whatnot. But yeah.
That is super messed up. So that's, I mean, this is a case where we can challenge. I forget what we call them. Holy religious holes. Is that what we call them?
Holy people.
Holy people. Holy
Yeah.
people. All
Yeah.
these holy people.
Hmm.
Are there other things that I mean, so monarchy, definitely like secular education,
Yeah.
right? I mean, these aren't really radical. Maybe in 1750,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
super
Yeah. Yeah.
radical.
That's the thing. I mean, I think now they're sort of commonplace, but 200 years ago or whatever, they wouldn't be. And I mean, I think maybe we can get into this now. I suppose that it also seems to happen that many atheists, when they reject monarchy, for example, they're then maybe more willing than the rest of the population to embrace democracy. Like, for example, again, I think we talked about this in a previous podcast. Like in the 1800s, atheists and other free thinkers were at the forefront of advocating for democracy, like extending the vote to everyone,
Mm,
um, to all men and to women as well.
yeah.
Um, and I think they were sort of ahead of their times in that. And I think maybe it's sort of like the issue we are talking about before, like about this issue of legitimacy.
Yeah.
Like if a monarch is not legitimate, then what is a legitimate form of government?
Well, okay, so we kind of left it off with like
Yeah.
none of the above for
Yes.
like
Right. Right.
morality and
Yes. That's
goodness.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so if we go the other way, right,
Hmm.
then who is a legitimate arbiter? Who is someone we can trust and go to and say what is good, what is bad, and respect what they say, and it becomes like our sort of guiding principles.
Hmm. Yeah. I think this is like the no gods, no masters thing is sort of an interesting way to think about it. But I would say, I guess for in a democracy, the answer is that we should sort of listen to someone who commands widespread support among people who give that person the authority. I mean, I see you're chuckling.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you must have
I'm not
way
sure
way
who that is.
way to poke holes in it. Oh, I
Yeah.
mean, and I guess I mean I guess the way to determine that is through an election.
Well, but we're not electing like the moral keeper, right?
No,
That would
that's
be
true. That's true.
yeah.
Yes. Oh, I mean, I guess like purely for laws and making laws and
Yeah,
executing government business and so on.
totally. But I think one of the things that we kind of this is a leap that we're not quite able to make yet. I think you and I in other discussions have struggled with how far we can push this one. But there is this sense of an anti-authoritarian streak in atheism. Like there kind of has to be.
Yeah.
Because if someone, and it's in this idea of no gods, no masters, if there's just this one person who is like the lawgiver, I am the lawgiver, right? And on Sunday we eat pizza. There's I think an implicit rejection of that in atheism.
Yeah.
Whereas what you said, your answer I thought was great with and it kind of showed a very democratic principle saying like, yeah, if I wanted to know what was good, I would talk to a doctor, a priest, and a garbage man. I talk to everybody.
Hmm. Hmm.
But not as a doctor, a priest, and a garbage man, just as like people,
Yeah. Right.
like
Right.
citizens, people who are part of my community, right? This is where we would get this our morality from. And it's also I think it's certainly in the phrase, right? No gods, no masters. It's wide open between being, well, I'm just a simple I just hate the king. Once we get rid of the king and have voting, that's fine. All the way to, there's you can't have any hierarchy of any sort, complete absolute anarchism, right? Like individualized anarchism where I am my own guide for morality. But that still cuts off a huge segment of like what we would accept politically as atheists. Right? We don't accept sort of arbitrary authorities dictating things to us.
Yeah. I mean, but maybe there's a distinction between like sort of a political question, like how should we govern ourselves, versus a moral question, like what is like a morally good thing to do.
Well, I mean, that is a political question, though, isn't it?
Um,
Isn't it the
I mean,
political
broadly
question?
defined, I guess. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think it's something like, like, is it right to tell like a white lie or something like that? Is sort of a moral question, but like, whereas, and I don't think the government should really be involved in that. You know, like punishing people who tell white lies or something. But like, if the question is like, should the government provide healthcare to citizens or something? I mean, that's a more political question. I mean, there's a moral question too in that, but yeah.
Well, but okay, Nathan, let's back it
Uh-huh.
up then.
Okay.
Like, if moral questions aren't political,
Hmm.
right? Are they eternal? Are they like set eternal answers? Are they scientific?
Well, I mean, like the white lie question. I don't think there's a there's not a scientific way to answer that question. I don't think. Like, should you tell white lies? Do you think there is, or
No, it's
okay?
definitely not scientifically answerable.
Yeah.
Which I think is it Dennett and Sam Harris. I don't know, what do they know? It's not morality isn't this scientific thing, but it's not handed down from the heavens either.
No, no, that's true.
This idea that like we have the answer for this and it was written on a stone tablet 6,000 years ago is a fiction. It's a
Yes.
complete fiction. It holds no water. We have no duty to obey it. It doesn't mean what people think it means anyway. What what matters is like we understand that it is socially constructed.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is what I mean by political, right? Like it's your actions help create and reinforce the norms of behavior. You help create the idea of what's right and appropriate, the same way you receive information about what's right and appropriate. Right? So by going out there and I mean like would you brag about all the little white lies you tell every day? Yeah, you
I
won't.
don't tell
You
any
don't do
white lies.
that. You don't do that. You might
No.
confess to a friend, like, yeah,
Mhm.
she was. And she was feeling down about her haircut, and I told her it looked great,
Right.
right? And your friend would be like,
Yes.
"Yeah, I mean, I said that too." You
Yeah.
gotta say things like that, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
how we get this idea of what's appropriate, what's correct, what we
Yeah.
ought to do.
Yeah. That's true, but just I mean, but I think you would make a if you wanted to find out whether you should tell a white lie, like you wouldn't put it to like a democratic election though, or something like that. So it's maybe
No, but
it's
that's a very different type of politics. That's
yeah,
that's
that's true.
that's
Yes.
governance more than
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah, yeah. We're meaning political more broadly.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So
Yeah.
the idea that we can get these arbitrary set of rules from someone in the past, or this translation of the meaning from someone
Mhm.
sort of received wisdom. Yeah, it's just this is the stuff that we reject, these sort of authoritarian politics. This is correct because I said it's correct. This
Yeah.
is true because we say it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there's an even like sort of maybe higher level issue about like who has the authority to tell us what's true. And I think in this case again like the no gods no masters thing is relevant because I think it's the authority is yourself. I mean, but then there might be people that you trust, like in the earlier examples you were using about like the doctor and the garbage man and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, there aren't. I mean, because it's an anti-authority. I this is the conclusions we've come to, and it's very difficult to show. But this idea that atheism is inherently anti-authoritarian, it does make things very complicated. It's super super easy to just say it's in the Bible,
Yeah.
or my pastor told me this.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're right. That's simple. And we see how complicated this gets even with things like the Soviets and totalitarian
Yes.
societies, right? When
Yes.
you have members of the Communist Party complaining that the state isn't atheistic enough,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? But not able to do anything, totally beholden to this centralized authority. How we justify an anti-authoritarian atheist program with totalitarian states is really weird, right? It's there's like that's a problem that we can't justify. But I think this is something that we see in a case that we wrote about earlier about the sex ed
Yeah.
vote referendum in Washington State. Do you remember that one?
Yes. It's that an article we wrote in the Humanist magazine about the last presidential election. And I guess and generally like nuns NONES voting patterns and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead. Yes.
so basically, in one of the cases, I mean, it's a great case, is that the Washington State in 2020 had a ballot measure referendum about sex education, which on itself, it's not directly or very clearly this religious bill. It doesn't look that way at first blush, but it had been passed by the state legislature, but it became a referendum in an attempt to overturn it, to appeal it. And this was led by religious groups, the religious right completely, to the point where they used we know it was like voter drives were located around churches. They were using their outreach programs were centered through churches and other religious organizations. But one of the reasons it seemed to have failed is that there were so many nuns, so many religiously unaffiliated in Washington State. And actually, looking at the PRRI survey, this is let me get their name right, Public Religion Research Institute. They just came out with their annual census of religiosity in America, and they've got like great data on how many nuns there are. And if you compare the density of religiously unaffiliated county by county in Washington state to the election outcome, it's almost perfectly predictive, county by county, where if you take the amount of nuns or religiously unaffiliated, add about 50% to itself, that will give you the total votes for the sex education bill to approve it. A couple ways to think about this. One is that leftists are atheists, right? It's just overlap. Liberals, atheists, same thing. That's stupid. It's right. Okay, that's one way. Another thing is this sort of network effect that the no voters are mobilized through churches. People who are not going to church don't hear these arguments. They don't talk to people who believe these arguments. Therefore, they vote differently. Okay, easy answer. But I think that what we're seeing in this is that when we're confronted with religious authorities or religious arguments for particular bills,
Mm-hmm.
that atheists and nuns and the religiously unaffiliated do not recognize the authority of that argument at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? That if when you have a priest come and say you need to vote against this bill, it doesn't matter. It falls on deaf ears because they don't have the authority, right? It's like your doctor telling you how to sort your garbage. It just
Yeah.
doesn't mean
Right.
anything.
Right.
It
Yes.
doesn't have any authority
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
And this cuts even if they came out and said, if a priest from your town came out and said, you know what, we should legalize marijuana. We should get the queen off our money. You'd be like, yeah, but for totally different reasons, right? It's not there. You don't recognize their authority. You might agree with their opinion, but you don't recognize their authority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's buried in this. This is something that's different from a liberal perspective, which might be about universality of human rights and all this other stuff, but not about what we fundamentally reject is any religious authority's right to tell us how we ought to live our lives.
Yeah. I think I think it probably extends to other questions like abortion or something like that, or same-sex marriage. And I'm sure that, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I'm sure that it's the case that atheists and agnostics and other non-religious people are, um, you know, disproportionately supportive of like same-sex marriage and access to abortions and so on. I mean, I think it's something. It's even. I think it's even extends a little bit beyond like purely cases where like religious people are advocating for opposing sex ed or something like that, and to sort of just to question like any unfounded authority. I mean, like the question about legalizing marijuana or something. I saw some poll about support among like different religions and atheists and so on, and it seems like atheists and agnostics have like the highest support for legalizing marijuana in the US. And I think it could be like, I mean, that's obviously not a directly religious question, but it could be that they're sort of skeptical. I mean, atheists and agnostics are skeptical of like anything saying like, such and such drug is bad. Well, why is it bad? Well, it's just because it is, and that's the way it's always been.
Right? Yeah.
So, um,
Oh God, my students used to make me crazy with that. It's all the time. Like it was like, why is alcohol legal?
right, exactly,
Because it's
exactly.
good. Well, why is it good? Because it's legal. But why is pot illegal? Because it's bad. What makes it bad? It's illegal.
Yeah,
What the
right.
hell? Like, oh my God, around and around we go.
Hmm. So I think there might be more of a willingness, like among atheists, to question things like that.
To pull on another thread earlier is like this idea of a fixed morality that comes from on high and is unchanging. Like the idea of questioning like which drugs are legal and why it can't exist in that formula, right? If you just think, okay, like yes, these are the 10 rules that we need to follow. Marijuana is a bad drug, bourbon is a good drug. That's all we need to know. Pass
Yeah.
the beer.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Light me up a camel, right? Because
Yeah.
that's a legal drug and it's okay.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it is like it is something, because atheists obvious or not obviously, but in most cases they've rejected the religion they were raised in. So this means that they're willing to question like they're more willing to question any kind of thing that is taken as a given. So that they're more willing to question traditional things. Like I think there's some people might say, why should we do this something this way? Like we've always done it that way, and that's what gives it like the legitimacy, I guess.
Are
Or
there
just
things
that, yeah.
that you've questioned that way?
Me?
Yeah.
Um, not anything offhand. I mean, I guess like something could be. I'm not a perfect vegetarian, but I mean, like, I don't eat as
Mhm.
much. I don't eat that much meat. I mean, that could be something. I mean, like, some people, it's a very big change, I suppose, like to not eat meat because it's like they've always eaten meat, and why change it? So I think that's something. I mean, that maybe it's like it could also be a kind of personal temperament. Maybe I don't know. Like
Well,
I'm.
I mean, yeah, that's a different thing.
Yeah,
The idea
yeah.
of like this is just personal temperament.
Hmm, hmm.
Um, I was gonna say that if we kind of push this example, right, and it's people who are raised atheist, would it be right to challenge your atheism as received information?
Oh, someone's raised atheists, and would an atheist be willing to question that? I mean, I think part of like, yeah, historically has been that atheists have they have thrown off the religion they were raised in, and then they were sort of minorities within their societies, and that's sort of informed how they've thought about politics probably. But when it is a case where someone's raised atheist, and maybe it's the case that more and more people are going to be raised atheists, will they then be sort of more like kind of blindly accepting atheism? I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's possible.
So I
Yeah.
think there's like a process in atheism,
Hmm, hmm.
right? Is it? I don't know. Then I guess it would just be received wisdom.
Yeah.
Maybe this is something to consider, like how we raise an atheist.
Yeah. Anytime I've heard atheists talking about raising kids, they always say, they don't want to indoctrinate their kids into atheism. They want to try and give them as much information about religions and atheism to allow their kid to make their own decision. So one would think that maybe, I don't know, maybe it's like an idealized impression of atheists, but like one would think maybe they would be teaching their kids like critical thinking skills and letting them make up their own minds.
Right. And I mean, it's also kind of akin to being like, well, most people were raised in the absence of QAnon, right?
Hmm,
And we all have the opportunity to accept or reject QAnon.
hmm.
So that would be fine. And in an atheist world, you would reject authoritarian claims, meaning like this is true because I said so, things like that,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Or we know it's true because I heard it from this guy. And there are, of course, there are methods by which we test received wisdom and accepted wisdom, like the scientific method
yeah.
supposedly does this, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, we need to go out there, challenge it, even though we just, yeah, it's just something that we heard from a guy. Of
Hmm.
course the sun revolves around the earth.
Yeah,
You've got to go out and yeah, take a look. Does it, how much does it make sense to you? Does it work out? Can you show that that's not the case?
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, most people haven't actually done the experiments themselves to verify. Uh, but well, I mean, one thing we should talk about, I guess, before we wrap up is like, again, like the question of legitimacy. And once atheists have gotten, or like the no gods no masters, once we've gotten rid of the masters, like what do we do? Like what is a legitimate authority for an atheist, I guess? I mean, I guess we've talked about that a little bit, but
Well,
yeah,
yeah, the things that we've recognized are like knowledge, power, and but there is this with the anti-authoritarian idea. It's that there is that we either do it purely ourselves, and this is where I think atheism gives a terrific
yeah,
range
yeah, that's true.
to political outcomes, some of which are right-leaning in a lot of ways. Right, you can develop a very libertarian tendency from this position. Right,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
I can reject all these moral authorities and make my own for me,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And that is a completely legitimate expression of atheism, right? The Bible's wrong, this is wrong. only person I can trust to know right from wrong is me. And you can have the more communitarian sense where we all ideas of right and wrong are constructs, and they're made and enforced through social interaction, and that's how we determine what's good and bad. I talk to members of my community, identify people who are performing actions that I think are correct. Basically, you use TikTok. That's the answer. All right. I'm a TikTokitarian.
Right.
That's where my morality. Oh God, what horrible morality. So yeah, those that gives us a pretty broad range there in terms
Yeah.
of where authority ought to be vested in constraints on personal power.
Yeah.
Is one way to put it.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
yeah, I think it pretty much runs like from libertarians and anarchists like to like communists and so on. I mean, who would favor like a really large state that has a lot of authority over people.
it
And
could,
yeah,
yeah,
and all of those could sort of fit under an atheist worldview.
right. But so long that it's not arbitrary and it's not based on received
Yes,
wisdom
right. Yeah.
or these like eternal laws that are mystically understood,
Yeah.
right?
I think one kind of form of politics which really is not compatible with atheism, I think is sort of more traditional conservatism where it's like very unwilling to break with tradition just like or it's like tradition for its own sake in that like we have a particular way of doing things and we've done it this way always and it's worked out well enough so far that we shouldn't tamper with it. And I think that's probably, I'm sure there's some atheists who might think that, but I think on the whole that's somewhat incompatible with atheism because obviously atheists have already made sort of a radical break with religion in most cases if they are raised that way. So I think that's, like it is true, like atheism is compatible with many different kinds of politics, but this sort of more traditional conservatism maybe not.
No, and especially when it's something that's just handed down
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
you have to accept it
Hmm.
from the
Hmm.
previous generation.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I can't think of any reason to disagree with that now.
Yeah, I mean probably there are atheists who might make that argument, but
Well,
yeah.
yeah, the thing that's coming to mind for me and is kind of making me feel a little silly about it is like being like a neo traditionalist in the sense that like you only practice new traditions.
Right.
Where you like
Yeah.
where you kind of either like invent the tradition or reinvent the tradition
Hmm.
every year. So like I don't know how it is for you, but the idea of like American Christmas, it isn't really there isn't really one version. It's kind of secular, it's kind of Christian, it follows the same basic, I don't know, Platonic form, right? But it mutates every generation as it gets combined with another tradition and things get dropped.
Yeah.
So I think in that way, and I think that way because one of the things, particular views of legitimacy I'm drawn to is this idea like I'm only beholden to the laws that I myself help create, right? That if we don't factor in the creation of the rules,
Hmm.
it's not ours to, like, we shouldn't be beholden to them, which is it's a ridiculous and kind of extreme idea,
Yeah.
but basically like we have to be able to decide if we're going to play by these rules or not.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think that's sort of true politically. Like, even like laws that were created decades ago sort of in theoretically in a democracy, like the legislature could always change those laws. And
Right,
if
yeah,
they choose not to, that's sort of an endorsement of them, I suppose.
right, yeah. And I think yeah, that's like one of the great traditions in British law
Hmm. Hmm.
or British parliament is that like you can't make a rule that limits a future parliament's ability to change that rule or law.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. So the idea, like, yeah, you can't like. So I think what this comes to is this idea where, like you're saying, you can't just take. you would never accept a tradition uncritically, or you may celebrate it, but not because it was given to you, right?
Yeah.
There's something about it, some volition in there somewhere,
Mhm.
or at least some challenge of it, some thought, right? You would
Yeah.
have to put that into it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. And there are like definitely those more authoritarian strains of conservatism, that segment of the right, the authoritarian right and conservative right, religious right especially, it's not compatible with that. Certainly not, because there has to be. It doesn't fit legitimate uses of power
Mhm. Mhm.
the way atheists understand it.
Mhm.
Well, Nathan, I feel like we've answered a question tonight.
Yeah, I think we
We
definitely.
totally did it. We nailed it.
Yeah, I think that problem has been solved. So on to
Right? Yeah. Since the dawn of
yeah,
time, man has wondered who has legitimate authority to tell
yeah,
me how to sort my
yeah,
garbage. And
yeah.
now we know.
The garbage man. Yeah,
Garbage man can. Oh, there we go.
yeah.
Worked out.
Yes.
Not the priest. Don't go to the priest.
No,
He doesn't know.
no, no,
It's
no.
all wine. That's it. It's just wine
Mm.
bottles with that guy. Oh my
um,
goodness. All right.
right.
Anything we need to any business we need to attend to here?
Just to like and subscribe and rate and review, etc., etc. The
Totally
podcast.
smash that button.
Yes.
Pull that string. Yeah. Is there anything they can kick?
I don't-
Maybe kick it old school.
Kicks.
There we
Yeah.
go.
I think that's the phrase. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, big thanks, Red Japan.
Yes.
Awesome track. You guys are killing it every
Yeah.
week. I don't know how they do it.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
all right, that's it
Okay.
for
All
me.
right. All right. We'll see everyone next time.